Hello everyone, it's taken me quite some time to get to a point of being able to talk about Outriders. There's so much to learn and so much to figure out, so it's taken me quite a while to be able to do all that. Now I'm ready to, and I want to have a discussion about it. Before I get into that though, I want to first say Happy Easter to all if you are celebrating that. People have either celebrated already or are going to celebrate. It's normal for families to celebrate early if their schedules are wonky. So I completely understand that dynamic. I come from a family where that did happen a couple of times with special days or occasions. Okay, with that said, I want to get into a quick FYI here. I will be using the Outriders wiki for doing this recording. I am well aware that the numbers may be off. But as far as where the passive nodes are, those have not changed. So yes, I am aware that the numbers will be different, but passive nodes are not. With that said, let's get into mechanics. I've had this pulled up since the start for a reason. It's because this will play a factor into the discussion. This is the most that I can find on what's considered close and long range. So as you can see, close range is anything inside 10 meters. Long range is anything outside 25, which is a really weird numbering system, but whatever. This is important because some passives or skills or mods may say close range or long range. It's just something to be aware of. There are, of course, classes that will change that, and we'll get into that in just a second. Let me go and get into the other mechanic that needs to be mentioned. Status effect will come into play with certain skills or possibly mods. Basically, the only way that you can scale it is by armor, and there's an example here in this article. I'll be sure to link that in the description along with everything else. But now that we've kind of covered the mechanics, I'm going to go ahead and quickly mention those exceptions. Devastator and Technomancer are the two that I'm aware of that do change these mechanics. Trickster might, but I haven't really done any reading to it because Trickster's not a class that interests me. But anyways, Devastator does have this Stone Circle passive way down here, which does change the meters for what is considered close range. But beyond that, I don't think there's really anything else to mention here with Devastator because I really don't think it's going to be that good of a class in the grand scheme of things. It's just a really weird setup here, and also moving on. Technomancer is the other one that can do it. So Devastator has the ability to change close range, and Technomancer has the ability to change long range. So it has the nitrogen capsule passives, which are on the topmost part of the tree. The nitrogen capsules reduce the range at which is considered long range. So you can bring it to about 20 meters for it to be considered long range. And to be honest, I don't think that it's really worth worrying about that because a lot of the missions that you will be in are going to be missions where they're not going to give you that 20 meters because you'll have stuff in your face or other problems to deal with. So I don't really think that it's really worth covering with Technomancer for that very reason. But anyways, yeah, so those are some exceptions to be aware of, and they're very good exceptions to be aware of depending on which build you're doing. Okay. So now that we've discussed the mechanics and everything, let's go and get into the classes individually. I've been paying attention to the discussions or class builds for Technomancer and Pyromancer the most, so I will be focused on that. For Technomancer in particular, I've noticed a lot of build guides or YouTube videos saying it's the most versatile class. I want to quickly disagree with that because of the fact that there's really only one build right now that will actually do solo missions, and if you don't believe me, there is a video on this right here. Solid FPS is a min-maxer, meaning that he looks for how to get the best numbers out of something. And his build is a Pestilence build on the Technomancer. And you'll see with the video I link that he did indeed solo an expedition at World Tier 15, which is pretty phenomenal. But yes, Pestilence is really about the only build that works for solo with Technomancer. If you have a group consistently, then okay, sure, you might be able to pull off a hybrid build in which you go Tech Shaman and then branch into Pestilence. You might be able to do it that way, but your DPS is going to be lower than a fully dedicated Pestilence build. So that's just one aspect to look at, the DPS. Another aspect I would recommend looking into to show you why this is not versatile is because of the skills themselves and just the way those work. So as you're probably aware, there are elites that have the ability to resist status effects out there. So Tech Shaman does have a lot to do with Cryo, or at least has the ability to branch into Cryo. But I would say that I wouldn't really consider that to be a point to make in terms of versatility. I mean, sure, it's nice to have, but given how few times you can really rely on Cryo, I would say it's not a point worth making when you're trying to have a discussion with versatility. As far as the heals, though, okay, sure, that's actually a really good part of the Tech Shaman tree. Getting bigger heals is really awesome, especially when you start combining them with mods. For sure, that's an awesome part, but I wouldn't rely on the Cryo side of it. As far as the Demolition tree is concerned, it's entirely reliant on the ability to use your Ordnance skills. So the problem with the Ordnance skills in particular is you have one called Pain Launcher, which is essentially a turret, and as with any game, AI is going to be super derpy. So there might be times when the Pain Launcher may target, let's just say, a line of enemies, and there's 3 in the line. Well, Pain Launcher may end up hitting the one on the left rather than one in the middle to maximize splash. That does happen. So you can't rely on Pain Launcher to actually aim where you want it to, most of the time. So, and then another thing too to keep in mind with the Demolition build is that it's entirely reliant on you being able to make the most out of your skills, and you can't rely on your skills 24/7 because of the cooldowns. Sure, you do get some Demolition cooldowns, but it's not going to be enough to sustain them constantly. So what I'm getting to here is there's several reasons I can point out where I don't agree with the whole versatility thing. Sure, it might be versatile in doing A, B, or C, but is it an overall versatile class? No, certainly not. There are other classes that can handle the versatility aspect a bit better. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's nice to have a class that can switch between doing heals and damage, but ultimately I would not say that this is a truly versatile class. But again, it's nice that you can switch between those two things. So that's kind of my take on the Technomancer. Now let's talk about Pyromancer. Okay, so let's talk about Pyromancer. So, I do think Pyromancer is going to be a bit better at the whole DPS thing than Technomancer. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand Solid FPS did a very good job with his build, but I do think that there's potential for Pyromancer to be a stronger gun build, because that's essentially what you're doing with Pestilence, is you're making a gun build. I think Pyromancer has the potential to do a better job with the gun build for a couple of reasons. Number 1, armor piercing like crazy. If you go down the middle tree, which is Firestorm, you can get access to a lot of armor piercing. Now, that's going to be a whole theoretical discussion in itself, but we'll get to that in a bit. But along your way in Firestorm, you do get weapon damage plus anomaly damage, which allows you to essentially do what the Technomancer Demolition build is doing, in which is trying to be in between anomaly damage and firepower. But with the Pyromancer, it's doing it a little bit more efficiently just because it's all in the same line. And then from there, you can branch out to increase that further. So, for example, you could go down into Inferno Bullets, which is firepower based on Anomaly Power. So I think it's like 15%. I can double check it, but I think it's like 15% of your Anomaly Power becomes firepower damage, or firepower. So you do have things like that going on, where you have this just really awesome synchronization going on, and the ability just to blend both worlds very efficiently with very few points. So yeah, I think that when it comes to that, this is probably a better way of handling it. I would say when it comes to damage, Pyromancer is probably a little bit more versatile in that category, because you don't have to go Firestorm and Mix Mash. You can go straight up into Ashbreaker and just do a lot of damage that way. Although I do think Firestorm is probably more efficient than that, just because of the synchronizations going on. Well, at least on the skill side. Now, for the class overall, I do think that if it's built right, then it's going to be a bit better at damage than most classes, including Trickster. And of course, I'll have to do some theory crafting or min-max, or ask some questions of other people to confirm that. Because luckily for me, there are a lot of Trickster mains, so I shouldn't have a hard time finding somebody to ask that. But we'll see. So yeah, armor piercing, anomaly damage, and also the mods too. That's another factor to bring into this whole DPS discussion. Unlike the Technomancer, the Pyromancer's Inferno Bullets do get stuff like reduction to armor. Now, whether or not that plays a factor with every single enemy has yet to be determined, but the fact of the matter is you do get stuff like that with the Volcanic Rounds. Whereas Technomancer is really just going to be critical damage. Now, critical damage is certainly important too, but it's one of those questions of, is the enemy you're up against, is it going to be better to hit it with raw damage or armor piercing? That's the big question of the day. So Inferno Bullets brings out the best in armor piercing or armor reduction, while Technomancer's Blight Rounds do the complete opposite and just go for raw damage, essentially, is what it is. So yes, that's going to have to be a discussion, and somebody's going to have to figure it out, because I don't think it's going to be possible for me to figure out what's better. Is raw damage overall the best, or is it armor piercing? Because if it's armor piercing, the Pyromancer is going to win at that game quite easy. So yeah, I think another thing too that can be said here is the skills. So if you compare the Pyromancer skills to the Technomancer's skills, you'll notice that there's a huge difference. So the Technomancer's issue is that a couple of its skills are turrets, which can be pretty derpy. On top of that, they're pretty short range, so you can't really rely on those hitting the enemy when you want them to. The other stuff in the Pyromancer tree, like Blight Rounds, the other skills like Blight Rounds, the heal, those are all like, and Pain Launcher. Pain Launcher. Tools of Destruction. Yeah, Tools of Destruction, the heal, the Blight Rounds, they're all pretty versatile because you can hit enemies at different ranges with those things, or at the very least make use of it with a party. But the Pyromancer, I think, has more versatile skills, just because of the fact that if you look at it, let's just say you go at Firestorm builds, then you will be looking at Heat Wave, Inferno Bullets, and Phaser Beam, all of which can hit at pretty good distances, and you're not going to run into the problem of AI being derpy. You manually aim that, so you know it's going to hit where you target. So I do think that overall the Pyromancer does have a bit more versatility in the skill sets, because they hit at different ranges and they're not relying on a derpy AI. So that's kind of my take on the two classes. But yeah, somebody's going to have to check to see if armor piercing is more valuable than raw damage before we can definitively determine which of these two classes is best at which. But I do think that Pyromancer has the potential to do more damage just because of all the awesome synchronization between firepower and anomaly damage, whereas Technomancer is entirely reliant on one or the other. It doesn't have that awesome synchronization. That's the short version. Anyways, that's all I have to say. Thanks for listening.